Dang it. All right. So if it wasn't obvious what the issue is the hydraulics bob really bad. It just sits there and bounces the implement whenever it's at the full lift position. And when you shut it off, it'll eventually just run the implement all the way to the ground. So it's got a leak somewhere in the high pressure circuit for the ram cylinder. So something is leaking somewhere and it's letting pressure out of the hydraulic ram. Worst case scenario is it's the control valve assembly, because that's a little cylindrical piece of metal that fits in a bushing. And as it slides back and forth, it controls where fluid can and can't go. And if it's worn out, it lets fluid around it and it runs out that baffle plate at the, this side of the assembly, which is looked to be where it was leaking from. The other major leak that you could see coming from this area is this back pressure valve. It doesn't have an O-ring in there. We found that out the last time we took it apart. So that's definitely not right. I got to find some way of sealing that up. So that is pretty much going to be the gist of that. And then I'm going to make sure it has the right hydraulic oil in it, because I don't know if what's in there is thinner than what it's supposed to have. If that's the case, that's also going to be a contributing issue. So I got to check that. Other than that, it's going to be take the seat off, undo the arms right there. All these bolts are different sizes, but it corresponds to their placement on the case here. So these ones are the shortest because they're the closest to the actual body. These ones are the second longest because, and then those ones are going to be the longest because they have to go through the most material. So bolts, not a huge deal. These two for the seat are actually studs. So last time we took it apart, one of those studs actually came out, and then we had to get it off the nut and run it back down into the top plate. Oh, the other major thing that's going to be probably going to be quite the challenge is these bushings for the lift arm. As best I can tell, are just completely blown out because you can just rock the arms all over the place. So they've already got one bolt broke off, so dealing with that is going to be fun. But anyways, so that's going to be correcting some of those issues is the ultimate task of this. Whew, man. I know a lot of people like to gripe about emissions equipment and stuff, but it still reeks of exhaust in here, and I haven't been in here in about an hour. So the 50s must have been pretty rough on the old lungs. All right, getting ready to pull the top plate. So you got to take the acorn nut off of this and then back this guy out. This is the back pressure check valve. And when you screw it in, you can see it here in a minute, but it pushes the line into the whatever, the valve body. So you have to unscrew this to pull the line out of the valve body so you can pull this off without tearing something off. Alright, I got this whole thing sat down on a table that is definitely not rated for what it weighs, but we'll ignore that for the time being. So I'm not going to pretend I know exactly how all this works, because there isn't a whole lot of parts here, but it is kind of complicated, at least to me, and how it all works. But my understanding of all this is the control valve. So this, you know, has some little cylindrical parts on it, and then it has a hole drilled all the way through the middle of it. So the thicker parts close off ports, and then when you drag it forward, it gets down to a cutout section, which lets fluid pass. And there's one of those sections that has a hole in it that goes to that passage that runs all the way through the control rod. So when fluid hits that, it runs through the inside of the control rod and comes out of this guy here, which I believe is one of the places that this is leaking from. Either it blew out somewhere around here where all this RTV is. It was either pushing oil out of there, which means we just need a gasket, or it was pushing out of this, which means this control valve is worn out. This is the, let's see, there's two pressure relief valves in here. I don't remember the names of each of them. Whatever this one's named, the purpose of this one is its job is to protect the cylinder. So if you're going along and, I don't know, something happens, you catch something on the 3-point really hard, and it tries to compress this fluid beyond what this cylinder is rated for, this guy bleeds off pressure. Or better yet, yeah, like if you have the brush hog on it and you have it picked up and you hit a massive bump and throw that brush hog around, this is probably going to pop off and relieve a little bit of pressure to protect the cylinder. Here is the rod, which it's a loose fit on the piston. The piston just pushes on it. And what that lets you do is, like if you have a scoop as the attachment and you want to dump dirt and make a pile, what you do is you have the hydraulics kind of picked up to whatever level you want, and you back into the dirt pile while simultaneously hitting the release on the scoop. And what it'll do is it'll dump the scoop, but to do that, it has to pick up the hydraulics. I don't know, I mean, if you've ever seen somebody doing that, like you run the scoop into the pile and the bottom of it catches and it dumps all the dirt out. And in the process, it picks up on the 3-point arms, but that's not a problem because this rod isn't actually connected to the piston. So it just pulls it away from the piston and then it comes back down when you drive away. Other things, so yeah, control lever, you can see there, moves the control valve. On the other side, I can't mess with it because it's sitting on it right now, but it's right here, is the draft control. So you flip this guy up, and what that does is this massive spring here, this rod moves, and you can see it's connected here. So what this does is whenever you put draft control on, or at least my understanding of what it does, is it helps to maintain the depth of the plow better. And then if the plow really catches something rough, it, you know, just because of the leverage on it, the plow wants to do this, which is going to compress, well, on the tractor, the plow wants to do this. So it pushes in on this top link, which pushes this guy, pushes the control valve in, and picks up on the blade for you. So it can try and get through it, and then, it, you know, without bogging the tractor down. And then once it's through it and the pressure comes off, it drops the blade back to where it's supposed to be. So that is the draft control. This piston, or this pin here, is not falling out. The reason this pin is here is so when when the, it's actually a pretty clever design. When the piston is getting pushed out of the hydraulic ram, it catches on this pin. Well, it's already pulled all the way. It catches on this pin and pulls the control valve back to cut the flow of fluid. So that way, you know, you don't just keep pressurizing it until something breaks. Am I forgetting anything? So I think that is pretty much it. I already took this guy off, unbolted the hydraulic ram and valve body assembly so we can get that pulled off. There's the pin that rides on this cam. So that is what control, that's how the valve body gets an input based for where the 3-point is actually at. So this had 5 bolts, got it off. All right, getting these bolts off for the lift arms. This one was a little tight and I just worked it back and forth and then finally got it off. These two over here really weren't even that tight. I mean, it was minimal effort to get them off. So I don't know why that one bolt broke, but I'm thankful that none of the other 3 did. I'm predicting a struggle. All right, here's a pause for the cause update. So I have that plate there, and the key is getting a plate on both of those, whatever boss is right there, because that's really the only thing to support it on that side. That does mean it leans a little bit, so I put a safety strap on there in case it tried to fly off that way. The socket is not structural. The socket is just there to cover up whatever the part of the press and that pin that I pulled off the tractor. Because if that pin slipped off, that socket will catch it and keep it from impaling me. That acetylene torch there, which I thought was empty, but it actually still has some gas left in it. Huh, it's a 6-speed down there. Wonder what that's going in. And it wasn't until I used that and just put a ton of heat on it. I mean, it is hot in this corner of the building from how much gas I've been burning in here, and I got all the doors open. And it wasn't until just now that I started making some actual progress. So it was all hung up on the lift arm. Oh. All right, something's burning. I guess I should deal with that. Also, while you're choking on fumes from burning hydraulic oil, note that when you pull the jack back up, there's nothing really holding this, and it's gonna try and fall. Okay, so it turns out all the problem I was having earlier was this fit, because these bushings are not a very tight press fit. So, got that one off the shaft, and then I put the shaft back in there. It only goes in one way because there's a special spline that lines everything up. And then just took a long rod and I was just tapping it on out. I mean, minimal effort to get the actual bushing out of the case. Time for an update. So I was going to put the bushings in here and I realized that they were not a press fit in the slightest in this housing. So then I took one of the old ones, cleaned it up a little bit, and it is also not even remotely a press fit in the housing. You can push it all the way in there, spin it by hand. It's just hanging out, no interference. So I couldn't find a lot of information as far as how it's supposed to be set up, but I can only assume it's supposed to be a press fit because this inner material is brass for that shaft to ride on. And so I'm thinking either these are the wrong bushings and someone's been in here before and also installed the wrong bushings, or what's probably more realistic is at some point those bushings started spinning in this housing for some reason. So, don't know. Anyways, what I did is I just put this in the vise and I went around it and put little tack welds and then hit them with the flap disc to grind them down a little bit. And then I haven't done this one yet, but then I went and just kind of hit the high spots that remained with a hand file. And then I tapped it in. And I installed it like this. So it's only this last little bit that really has the interference fit, just because I didn't want to do it like this and then have to fight that all the way through. And then to install them, bearing race installer, I just put the piece on backwards and hammered it in like that. It wasn't a big deal. Okay, apparently these splines are supposed to get grease on them. So I went ahead and put some grease on there. I really don't know why they have that, but that's what I read. So only one bushing is installed. The other one is still out because if you remember when this came apart, this section of splines is a bigger diameter than these. So I got one bushing in, then I'm gonna have to put the shaft in, then I can install the final bushing. Because if you put this bushing in, it can't get past the splines. Also pre-greasing the bushings on the inside before installing them. It's just the old bushing, so I have something to push the new one in with. Alright, so I got this arm back on. This is the one that obviously put up all the fight coming off. Going on, it was a little more difficult than I wanted it to be. So I pretty much just had this whole thing standing up like that. And I have it sitting on a piece of wood so I don't tear up the end of the shaft, because when you're really hammering on something, you got to be aware of how you're potentially distorting the metal. So if you mushroom out the end of that shaft, it's going to be a really bad day. Likewise, if you damage any of this up here, it's also going to be a really bad day. So I used one of the old bushings across the top of the lift arm. And then since I don't realistically have a hammer that big, I was using this one with a metal hammer, or a metal handle, and I was just hammering sideways on it. And so took a little bit, but I think I got it on where it's supposed to be. Gobbed a whole, I also put some anti-seize on all of that to hopefully help it never do this again. And then I piled on a bunch of grease around here, since as far as I can tell, the grease is the only thing that acts as a seal. And clearly there was a whole bunch of dirt getting all up in here. So the other one shouldn't be anywhere near as difficult, so I just get to pop in on now. Also, I thought this was kind of funny, given how the other side fought me so much. Bear in mind, just like this centerpiece, all of this only goes together one way. There is one spline that is different that corresponds to the shaft, so all of this can only go together one way. Don't try and force it any other way. All right, so I got this side buttoned up. I did the same deal, put the extension through here in order to hold this while I torque the other end down. Don't know what the torque stick is, just got it decently tight. I haven't done the fold over locks yet. One thing I did do is the back of this washer where it mates up against the lift arm, this whatever fold over lock thing, the back side of it and the back side of the head of the bolts, I put a little bit of gasket maker on so that hopefully it will keep that all watertight and keep water from getting back in there. And then on the bolts, I went ahead and hit them with some of the anti-seize as well. I only have one bolt. Bolt store's closed today, so I'm just going to be putting this side together with the one bolt for now. Put a whole bunch of anti-seize in there. So the shaft isn't flush with the face of the lift arm. I don't know how it's supposed to be. That's how it was when I took it off, so that's just how I'm putting it back together. So since there's that void in there, I went ahead and just put some of that anti-seize in there, and then I'll do the same deal. I'll RTV up everything that seals up this end here so that hopefully moisture and water, dirt, all that won't ever get in there again. Made a little bit of progress and learned a thing. So I got all this back together, pins back in, Carter key's good. So I found this little guy. I don't want to pull it back out right now, but this wasn't here originally. So when we took this apart the first time, and thus also this last time, there wasn't anything here. And so that's why there was all of that oil gushing down right in here in that video at the beginning, is because the back pressure valve didn't have any way of sealing against the valve body. So there's supposed to be this rubber seal in here, and I guess at some point somebody was in here and this thing fell out. And it's pretty, I mean, you can see how much it compressed originally. So it used to be soft, but it's pretty hard right now. So I just took a generic fuel resistant O-ring and popped it back there just to push it out a little bit. So hopefully that'll give it something to seal against, and it seems to be pressed in there enough that it's not going to fall out. But that for sure was causing a different problem. If you look down there, that hole in the bottom of the case, that is the suction for the pump. So that is where the pump pulls oil out of the reservoir. And honestly, I'm shocked that there's not like a screen or a raised section or something around that. But that rubber seal, whenever I drained the oil out of this, was sitting right on top of that port. So instead of that port being 3/4 of an inch, it was basically necked down to maybe 3/8 of an inch. This is not even remotely how clean this was. I used up a bunch of paper towels and tried to clean all the sludge out of this thing as best I could. It was absolutely filthy in here. Okay, it wasn't bad for other ones that I saw people take apart, but I mean, you can see the funk that was coming out of it. I mean, yeah. Whenever you pull it out, because, well, I can't get it threaded in now, but whenever you start threading it in, it pushes this into that seal on the valve body. There's the pressure relief valve down there. So anyways, I think that is that. I'm gonna put some oil in it and start trying to get this put back together. Last thing I'm gonna go ahead and do before putting this on is I got some of the fresh oil and just got it on a rag, and I went and just dabbed everything, put a little bit of oil on everything, so hopefully it has some kind of corrosion resistance to moisture. And that also got any remaining dust or what have you off of it. So another thing I'm gonna do, just because it's convenient, is I'm checking the torque on the axle nuts, and it's some kind of crazy, like 450 foot-pounds, which obviously you're not really gonna find a torque wrench that does that. So what I did, whatever, big giant socket, whatever size it is, 2-inch. There's a mark on this so I can get the cheater pipe in the same spot each time. I made a mark there. So with my weight from the center line to there, if I center my weight over that, that's 450 foot-pounds of torque. So 450 equals my weight times some distance of X. That distance came out to just a little over 2.5 feet. So my weight, 2.5 feet out from the center line of the axle, is 450 foot-pounds. So that was an easy way of torquing that. The other deal I forgot to mention is this really only works if your weight is going pretty much perpendicular to the ground. So the other side wasn't that loose. This side, I don't know, it maybe got 15 degrees out of it. So it was getting a little loose, I think, but it doesn't seem too bad. So the hydraulics are a lot quicker. As far as they change direction way quicker than they used to. I mean, there's maybe only a second worth of delay in it now, whereas before it might take it several seconds to start picking it up when the fluid's cold. But you can see it still bounces. If you put it at a midpoint though, it kind of holds it a little bit better because I think that unloading valve is doing what it's supposed to. So as long as it's not all the way up, it doesn't bounce near as hard. So to fix that is going to be more involved than I want to deal with right now, but it's definitely improved.